momentum going in the region to explore ways of developing our peace building skills, our facilitation skills, to examine the current issues on how we as people can make a difference in our communities. So today we have a very special guest, Rukmini Iyer, who from Mumbai. She is She has a consultancy, Exult Solutions, that specializes in the topic that she's sharing today, and also in resilience. And she's also a Rotary Peace Fellow from Chulalongkorn University. Can I get everyone to please in the chat box introduce yourself, where you are joining us from, how you heard about today, if you are a Peace Fellow, a Rotarian, or just interested in the topic, or anything, the questions that you have at this moment, while we give other people a few minutes to join us. So I'll just mute myself for the next minute. While we wait, I'll just let you know that we have a few events coming up this month. On the 22nd of August, we have a session led by Jackie Cowley on drama and peace building. And they come from a Pacific Island perspective. She's from Papua New Guinea, and she will also have someone assisting her on that day. We are also hosting a session on the community resilience model, which will be hosted by the Trauma Resilience Institute in the US. That session for those in the South Pacific will be a bit late at 10 p.m. Australian time, AEST, 10 to 1 a.m. But for those in Asia, it will be not as late for you. So that's in the middle of the week. So if any of those are of interest to you, we will have, do join us on the Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association Facebook page. So Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association. And as well, you can find us on our webpage is RPF for Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association, rpfaa.org. So that would be posted as an update, but do follow us on our Facebook page, because that's the best way for us to communicate about events that might not be on our official webpage as well. So we have quite a few events coming over the next few months. So do join us through that. Rukmini, I wonder whether we might want to start. It's 5 minutes, do you think?
Yes.
For those who just joined, sorry, if you haven't introduced yourself, please introduce where you're coming from, how you heard about this event, if you're a Peace Fellow, Peace Builder, Rotarian, or just interested in the topic. Thank you. Pass on to you, Rukmini.
Thanks, Elaine. And hi, it's good afternoon where I am, but also good evening and good morning to some of you. My name is Rukmini. As Elaine said, I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and the topic for today is something that's been very close to my heart in terms of me having worked with it for a few years, not just as a technique, but also as a philosophy and as a value that I cherish very deeply. And it's an absolute pleasure sharing that with this community, and I'm enjoying reading on the chat the variety in the audience, from Peace Fellows to Rotarians to also some people who have nothing to do with Rotary or with Peace Fellows. So welcome everyone, and today is it's a conversation, it's also a lot of reflection. And while some of us may have heard about NVC, nonviolent communication, as a technique, if you feel it's absolutely the first time you're hearing these three terms put together, for that's absolutely okay too. The intention for today is to familiarize all of us with a four-step process that's at the heart of NVC practice, and it's something that can be practiced by each of us regardless of age, gender, profession, language, any of it. It's a beautiful practice, and the intent of the practice is connection with another human being. So it's needless to say, it's often used in the context of conflict resolution, in which a lot of us here work. However, it's also something that's very relevant even on a very personal basis, even in terms of resolving inner conflicts, for example. And of course, if you have to apply it outside of self, then it's something that can be very easily applied to your conversations with your partners, with family, friends, colleagues, and so on. And there's also the possibility of creating large-scale organizational or systemic interventions with NVC at the core of it. So those are the possibilities we are open to, and what we intend to explore in these 2 hours is to get some clarity around the steps involved in the practice, and we will also do some bit of practice with each other in smaller groups and breakout rooms, so that we get a grasp on the concept very clearly. And yeah, welcome again, everyone. We are expecting perhaps a few more people to join in, but hopefully we'll integrate them along in our conversation as we go along. Let me start sharing my screen in the meanwhile. So, like I said, some of us may have heard of this term, some of us may not have, and that's absolutely okay. At the heart of NVC practice is creating compassion, and therefore at the heart of our intent as this community today is also, how do we create compassion through the way we are, through the way we communicate with ourselves and also with others. So as we step into this, I'd invite all of us to completely connect with yourself where you are, and with this small community that's in exploration together for the next 2 hours. And I'm going to read out one of my favorite poems to you. And if you'd like, you might want to listen to it with your eyes closed while you sit in a relaxed manner, or you may wish to keep your eyes open if that's comfortable. As I read the poem, do try and connect with what's the impact of the words on you. At what level does it impact you? At the level of thoughts or feelings, or perhaps even something deeper. This is a poem called Unconditional by Jennifer Wellwood, and here it goes. Willing to experience aloneness, I discover connection everywhere. Turning to face my fear, I meet the warrior who lives within. Opening to my loss, I gain the embrace of the universe. Surrendering into emptiness, I find fullness without end. Each condition I flee from pursues me. Each condition I welcome transforms me and becomes itself transformed into its radiant, jewel-like essence. I bow to the one who has made it so, who has crafted this master game. To play it is purest delight. To honor its form, true devotion. That's Unconditional by Jennifer Wellwood. And I find that every time I read this, it touches me in a manner that's extremely deep and meaningful, and it opens up yet another layer of meaning for me. And I hope it resonates with all of you as well. So as we step into the workshop today, I, of course, want to name and acknowledge the contribution of Marshall Rosenberg, on whose work NVC is based. Nonviolent communication is something that he propounded years ago. And then over the years, there have been several other practitioners that have added their insights and experiences into this work. But Marshall's work continues to be the bedrock of anything and everything to do with NVC. And as we proceed, I also want to acknowledge the impact of the work of Robert Gonzalez, who's another great teacher of NVC, who largely works with NVC in the context of compassion and living compassion. And that's another person that's influenced my thought process a lot in terms of using this work. So those are two people that I wish to acknowledge as we go forward. For a moment, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite us to put in the chat box how many of us have heard of NVC? Or perhaps that's a bad question for a chat box. Maybe if you could put in a yes or a no, or maybe something more descriptive in terms of your relationship with NVC. Have you heard about it, used it, never heard of it? Either way, you could let us know. Okay, we hear Nimita say, heard about it, Jayashree heard, Madhu heard, no, heard, but never encountered. Okay. Attended workshops, heard of it, read some. Perla says, is NVC also called compassionate listening? I'm not so sure, Perla. I haven't quite heard it in that context, but yes, a lot of NVC work has to do with compassion. I mean, at the heart of it is the intent to touch our own compassion. So perhaps they're related, but usually in the NVC circles, it's just called NVC. So I'm not sure if you're talking of the same thing. Not sure. Okay, so we seem to have a lovely mix in the audience of people who've heard, know a fair bit. Some people who've heard, encountered, but not used, and some people that have not heard. But yeah, all of it is welcome as we go along. Very often when I work with NVC in communities, or sometimes even with my corporate clients, their first response when they hear the word non-violent communication is that I'm not a violent person. And that's often an interesting response. And Yes, where most of us, I'm sure, at least most of us here in the peace building circle, don't think of ourselves as violent people at all. And in fact, the all our effort and all our life is dedicated to the other end of it, right? Towards non-violence, towards building peace. But it's amazing how much unsaid and sometimes even unacknowledged violence I am capable of. And I'm speaking here only for myself, in the sense that I would normally think of myself as someone who's fairly peaceful and someone not prone to murderous rage or any of that, right? However, violence springs up in my communication in many, many subtle ways, which often go unheard and often are completely not noticed by me, and sometimes not even noticed by others, but they're felt for sure. The impact of it is definitely something that is uh, that's quite tangible and perceptible. So when we say violence in communication, what we're talking about is something as simple as so yesterday I spoke to an old friend, and I was expecting to hear from her for a while, and then somehow we kept putting off. And yesterday, finally, we managed to get in touch over a call, and I said something around, "Oh, you finally got time to call me." Right? And the tone in which I said it was in jest, so it was, I was hoping it would be taken as something that's humorous and something that's a light comment. However, when I make a statement like that, "Oh, you finally got time to call me," there is an inherent accusation, right? That there is an inherent emotional violence that's embedded in that simple statement, which might sound like a simple, "Hey, how are you?" But there is that tonality of violence which, if built up over a period of time, can really scar the relationship. So that's what we mean by violence in communication. It's not something overt. It's not about screaming and shouting. It's not about using swear words. It's not about a certain kind of language or body language for that matter. It's the inherent assumption of wanting to hurt another that's often present in our communication, and it's very human to have that present, right? So it's not a bad thing to have that. It's just that it comes in the way of true connection, and sometimes, particularly in spaces of communication where we are attempting to build connection, where we are attempting to resolve conflicts, that unsaid violence does not help to build that connection, and hence the philosophy of nonviolent communication. So often NVC is spoken of as the language of needs, right? And we will come to why that is later. But what we are attempting to do in this entire process, in the time that we have, is to understand how do we connect with another human being in the context of what I need and what they need. And in the process, therefore, really look at the humanity of each other, the common, basic, universal needs that unite all of us, regardless of who we are or where we are from. So let me go back to my screen. And yeah, as we step into this space, a few requests from me. We will attempt to do as much sharing as we can, given the number of people and given that we're doing this virtually. But there is a possibility, particularly in the breakout room exercises, that you might want to share things that you're going through. You might want to share feelings that are very personal to you. And of course, my invitation would be, by all means, please do share. And therefore, for all of us to be able to hold a safe container for each other, I request that we, at any given point in time, maintain respect in terms of the language, in terms of the way we connect and communicate with each other on this call. Also try and be as brief as possible in your communication, whether it's on the chat box or whether you're speaking out loud, so that everyone has enough time to share. And very importantly, what's discussed in this conversation remains in this conversation. So those are 3 requests that I have of all of us here. And I trust that it's a yes in terms of your agreement here, in the context of saving time and also in the context of honoring each other. I do hope that all of us are willing to respect these 3 requests as we proceed to the session. Okay, so we're going to be going through the NVC process today, and try and use it in a conversation that's relevant to you. Okay, so as we proceed, you might want to do this quick thought exercise where you think of a challenging conversation that you need to have, perhaps in the near future, with someone that you care for. It could be someone who's a family member, friend, colleague, anyone that you think you need to have a challenging conversation with. Or it could perhaps also be a challenging conversation you've had in the near past and you wish you'd had it, you wish you had dealt with it differently, right? So you may also wish to explore how else could you have the same conversation in a manner that it lands better, in a manner that there's more connection with the person you're dealing with. So just think of that conversation for now. And once you've identified it, we will continue to work with the conversation. And what we are attempting to do with that conversation is to build in an NVC structure, which is a 4-step process that you see on the screen. And we will go deeper into this 4-step process, so you don't have to worry about remembering this or noting it down right away. But here is the 4-step process that we're looking to go to. What we're looking to do is to be able to reframe the challenge that you have, the conflict that you have with another person, as an observation to start with, and then we will move on to a certain feelings and needs that you have in the context of that observation, and then step into the most crucial aspect of NVC, which is around request. So those are the steps that we will go through as we proceed. So I hope you've been able to identify a conflict or a challenge that you want to work with as we go forward. And it could be, it doesn't have to be something huge, okay? So it doesn't have to be about saying, okay, we can't make that $1 million investment in our organization, right? It doesn't have to be huge. It could be as simple as saying, I don't like the way you stack the dishes once they're done, right? It could be a conversation like that as well. So think about any conflict or a challenging conversation that you'd like to have or you've had in the recent past, and we'll work with that as we go forward. Okay, so 2 terms that you might hear me using in the process of this conversation today is one is Jackling. And Jackling in NVC, this was a term that Marshall Rosenberg used when he first started working with NVC. Jackling is where NVC is not used, right, in a very simplistic manner. So when we communicate in a way that we are jackling out or jackling in, which means I'm jackling out as in talking in a violent manner to someone else, or jackling in, talking in a violent manner to myself, both of those are processes where it's a non-NVC conversation, right? What we mean by non-NVCs, for example, if I'm telling myself, oops, I dropped that glass again, I'm so stupid. Right? That's me jackling in. I'm trying to, I'm being violent towards myself by labeling myself, by judging myself in a way that's not resourceful, that's not particularly helpful to me. Jackling out could be about saying, oh, haven't I taught you how to stack the dishes properly? You still never do it right. That's that's a way of jackling out, where you're trying to sometimes bully another, sometimes make a sarcastic comment, or talk about, or maybe even expressing anger in a way that is not very, well, let's say, resourceful. So yeah, and that brings me to the point also about a question that's often asked with NVC, that is it a process that allows for genuine expression of anger or rage? And my response is an emphatic yes. That yes, NVC is about authentic communication, and therefore a lot of times what we communicate through NVC is very real expressions of anger or grief or jealousy or other feelings that can be termed as unpleasant, right? So NVC allows for space for all of that. It's not about being nice. It's certainly not about being diplomatic or tactful. It's about being real, but being real in a way that is respectful of self and respectful of another's needs. So it is a fairly spacious modality in that sense. So yeah, jackling is one term that you might hear me use. The other term that you'll hear me use is giraffing, and pretty much the whole of NVC is the language of the giraffe, as Marshall Rosenberg would put it. Don't ask me why he chose these two animals. He just did, perhaps having observed their temperament and the way they act in the wild. There isn't really too much written about it, but yes, the idea is that the language of the giraffe, in the sense the giraffe is able to plug out, given its height, given how long its neck is, it's able to plug out of a ground level view where one can be all caught up and disturbed, and be able to step up, step back, look at things from an objective point of view, and then respond to a situation. And that's usually the reason why we use jackal and giraffe as metaphors when we talk of NVC. Sagar, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share that I've in the training that I attended, I had heard that since giraffe is the only mammal with the largest heart, it has a huge heart, and as you said that it's pretty long, so it has that like an overarching view.
Mm-hmm.
And jackal is like so narrow, so small, so the view that jackal has is a very self-obsessed and just thinking about oneself, so that's also kind of used.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that in, Sagar. Yeah, I didn't realize the large heart bit, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense in the context of NVC. Thanks for bringing that in. Okay, so those are two terms that you'll hear me use. And the process, as I said before, is going to be a 4-step process, which is going to be observation, feeling, needs, and requests. And we will go through each of these steps slowly and gradually. So we will get into details about what each of these words, which we, of course, use day in and day out, what each of them mean. We'll start with the process of observation. Okay. And when we use the term observation, let me stop sharing screen for a bit so that I can see chat. When I use the term observation, what comes to mind for us? If you could type in on the chat box, well, how is observation different from maybe fact or truth or my version of the event? How is an observation different from any of that? Okay, focusing on facts. Observation is what's visible. That's a good point. Being objective, detached, witnessing. Observation has ambience, expressions. The way I see things, my perspective, subjective view. Okay, we've got objective and subjective, both responses. Observation draws attention to the point you're raising, your view of an event, focus on actions and behavior only, information gathered from the senses, okay? Learning from others, my view, it's biased, okay. So we're getting a variety of responses around the term observation. In the context of NVC, we use observation in a specific way, and it's important to understand that definition right so that we're able to work further through the process. So let's dig into this a little bit. Let's try this exercise. Look around in the room that you're in or in whatever surroundings that you are in, and try and on the chat box note down 3 observations about the room that you are in. For example, in my room, I have curtains that are white in color. The wall is light yellow, and there's a painting above the table. So those are 3 observations I can share about my room. Okay, Ranu says well lit, windy, neat, messy, dim, dark carpet. Okay, let's wait for a few more. Sun's pouring in, yellow curtains, messy room. Crows next to the window, breezy, sound of the fan, lots of books, lights are on, cold, dark corners, warm, computers on the table, heated, closed window, lit in yellow, neat, well lit, large screen, playroom for kids, ambience, okay. Room has a Daikin AC, toys all over the floor, air conditioning on, starting to get dark outside. Okay. In the language of NVC, when we say observation, we mean something that is observable, in the sense it's something that one can see with one's eyes or listen to with one's ears or touch with one's hands. So it's something that one can, like somebody said, one can use one's sense organs to be able to verify it. That's one qualification for an observation. And therefore, the term of observation does not accommodate anything that is my opinion or my point of view. For example, some of the notes that we have here on the chat box are that, for example, the room is messy, right? Now, my room is messy. I mean, I would say that about my room too, but having said that, that's my opinion, right? And somebody else might say, you know, it's perfectly livable and it's okay. So a messy room is an opinion, right? If I were to convert that to an observation, I might say that there's a pile of books on the table scattered in a random way. Right? That could be an observation in the sense I can say that there is a pile of books on the table. But if I say the table looks messy, that's my opinion. That's not an observation. Similarly, I think there were a couple of others, for example, people feeling warm or feeling cold. Again, that's your experience of it. Someone might feel warm in the same room while someone else is feeling nippy. So again, that's subjective experience. So when we say observation, we're talking about only something that has no, you know, there's no debate around its existence. So for example, if a curtain's white, it's white and no one can deny that. Or let's say the brand of the air conditioning or the color of the tiles is not something that one can deny. Gabe says lots of books. Again, the term lots may not necessarily fall under the category of observation. What's lots for you may be a few for someone else. There are books is an observation, right? And lots or not is subjective. Someone says unmanaged. Well, unmanaged is an opinion, whereas you know, if the room has things placed in a certain way, that might be an observation. So crows next to the window is something that's verifiable. That's an observation. There is a playroom for kids is an observation. It's quiet. Well, quiet is, well, it's partly an observation, but partly also it could be my definition of quiet. So it's somewhere on the fence there. Right. So James says observation sounds like description, not an opinion. No, James, we're talking about, I know the term observation is used in many disciplines in many different ways. In the context of NVC, it's used, if I were to look at a very simple analogy, it would be something that if there were a CCTV camera in your room, the camera would be able to verify what you're saying. Only then would it categorize as an observation in NVC, right? So therefore, there is that thin line between what qualifies as observation and what is perhaps one's lived experience, but may not necessarily qualify as observation in the context of NVC. But I'm loving the way we are engaging with this. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you another question. Let's, we observe the room around us. Think about a person you love, okay? A person that you get along with well, if not love, at least like well. And give us 3 observations about that person in the chat box. What how is that person like? Of course, you don't need to name them, but just the qualities. What is it that you like about that person as observations? Neat, playful, funny, peace of mind, kind, generous, caring, trusting, sharing, generous, expressive, funny, live alone, so I can't mention. Madhu, I do hope you have some people in your life that you like. Is a fitness trainer, okay. Intelligent, funny, talented, kin, generous, fun, expresses thoughts. James, the question is, we are thinking about a person that we like, and we are attempting to make 3 observations about that person. Loves chocolate, patience, understanding, generosity, honest, straightforward, not argumentative, short height, brown eyes, blue shirt, exudes confidence, sense of humor, smile, hairy, laughs. Okay. Resourceful, thoughtful, committed. Okay. Lovely, kind-hearted, family-oriented. Okay. So we're hearing a lot of adjectives there. And again, if we were to come back and remember, the whole intention of this exercise is for us to be able to translate opinions or thoughts or sometimes even beliefs into observations, right? That's the reason we're trying to play with this term. So here, when we look at observations, things that might be verifiable are someone being short, yes, can be verified. Of course, again, assuming there is a general agreement on the term short or tall, as the case may be. One can easily verify brown eyes. Hairy, again, yeah, can be verified. Someone being humorous, well, that's subjective, right? I think someone's humorous, someone else may not find them humorous or funny. So that becomes slightly subjective. Exudes confidence. Again, confidence is my opinion of it. If I were to convert confidence into an observation, I might state it in terms of saying that the person uses a certain kind of body language or uses a certain manner of presentation, which for me depicts confidence, right? So confidence is my interpretation of it. The observation around it could be something more tangible, something more observable. Loves chocolate, well, can be verified. Yeah, you can ask the person if they love it or not. Blue shirt, okay, yeah, that's an observation for now. Hopefully that person doesn't wear blue shirts all the time. Patience, understanding, generosity. Well, all of that again is our experience of that person, right? Now, what kind of behavior makes us think they are patient or they are generous? It is what would be the observation around it. Right? For example, yesterday I spoke to this friend of mine and I ranted. I spoke straight through for 20 minutes on the phone, and this person kept hearing and gave me verbal nods. Right? So the fact that this person did not interrupt me for 20 minutes as I vented, the act of not interrupting for 20 minutes is the observation. My interpretation of that is that the person is patient. Or someone says someone's a fitness trainer. Yeah, that can be an observation in the sense you can verify it. Family oriented, well, that's again my perception of it, but one might find ways to verify that and convert it into an observation. Always dressed to impress. The always is my opinion. However, I might say that the person dresses to the occasion, and that might be an observation. The person dresses appropriately for every occasion. That could be an observation. Aging, again, I'm not so sure where that lands. Maybe there are certain parameters which are sort of tangible about aging, but that could be subjective as well. Okay, I'm going to give you the last and perhaps the more challenging question. Give me observations, okay, and not opinions. So no Jackling, but Giraffing. Observations about this person who came to mind when I told you to think about a conflict that you have or a challenging conversation you need to have. Think about that person, right? So someone that you're perhaps not on the best terms with right now. Try and give me 3 observations about that person. Nimita says appropriately dressed. Would that be an observation? For the most part, yes. Assuming there is an appropriate dress code which is agreed upon in a given context, yeah, it's something that could be, yes, classified as an observation. Okay. All right, to the question that we are working with, we have a response: cunning, manipulative, opportunist, sleeps in the day, not eating well, not responding to people's messages, talks all the time. Okay, let's wait for some more. And yeah, I'm going to again encourage you to try and translate the Jackling into an observation. Right? Maybe step back a little bit and look at how would a CCTV camera classify their behavior. Judged me by saying you are a manipulator. Okay. Judged me again is my opinion, right? I mean, I felt judged. That's on me. Right? The person said you're a manipulator could be an observation. The judging is mine. Okay, mother, long hair, blue eyes. That's well done, Jung. Yeah, all of those are classified as observations. Insensitive could be your experience of it, Sunita, but what the person does, it would be the observation around it. So what is it that they say or do that makes you come to the inference of them being insensitive? That would be the observation. Speaks about 100 words a minute. That's a sharp observation there. Shares data without sources. Okay, that's a great example of observation, Jayashree. Shouted when asked to pause. For this to classify as an observation, we will have to put a timestamp on it, right? So that one time when they were asked to pause, they shouted, right? So it's not an always statement. One clue for us to distinguish between observation and our opinion or judgment is if you're tempted to say always or never, it's very likely our opinion, right? It's not usually an observation because it's a judgment that we're attempting to pass. Headstrong, judging, inflexible. And Simon, I would encourage you to think about what would be the observation around it. These seem to be your inferences about the person. What did they say or do which makes you draw this inference? That would be an observation. Loud mouth, again, similar thing. Arrives to work on time. That's an interesting one. Richard is task driven. Well, that's a challenging one to classify as an observation. Maybe if you could have data around it, that data could be observation. Has small personal space. Well, yeah, again, that's a challenging one, but yes, it could be proven tangibly. So long as we are not using the words always or never around it, but to say that one time the person did not demonstrate personal space. Right? So that could be an observation. Looks busy, unapproachable. Some bit of judgment there, Perla. If you could drill down deeper to look at what is it that they say or do that leads to the judgment of being unapproachable, that part could be an observation. Does not allow me to finish talking before starting to speak. That's a good attempt, James. so long as we're not saying never allows. Okay, maybe that one time he did not allow me to finish talking, that could be an observation, that in that particular conversation I was not allowed to finish what I wanted to say. That could be an observation. Cuts short a conversation when it gets uncomfortable. That's my opinion of it. So you might want to convert that. Often gives his opinion. Again, so one of the things with for us to work with observation, and the reason we're spending a lot of time around this is because if we don't get observations right, the rest of the NVC process does not quite flow. Right? A lot of times we believe something is an observation just because we've established in our mind that that's the truth, that's my reality, that's my fact. Right? And having said that, it's just my point of view and my experience, not to discount it, but that's not the only way, that's not the only reality in the world, right? So when we draft observations, when we convert our experiences into observations, it's important to look at what is the core data around it. So for example, if I experience someone as being too busy for me or unapproachable, that's my experience of it. However, if I were to plug back and convert it to an observation, I might say that that yesterday when I really wanted to have this conversation with this person, and I had in fact requested for time, the person, when I called them, the person turned me down and said that they did not have time at that point and they were unwilling to commit for another appointment. Right? So the observation around it is I approached them at a given time, I requested for another appointment, I was denied. That part of it is the observation. Based on that experience, the fact that I've labeled them unapproachable is my opinion, right? So that's not an observation. Observation is that the person did not honor an appointment, the person did not give me another appointment, right? That's something, that's the data around it. So Nabil says, can observation be projection? No, and that's the point we're trying to make here, Nabil, that observation is not projection in the sense that observation is raw data, right? I may have projections around the observation. Right? So for example, if someone did not make eye contact with me during a conversation, the observation is that in this particular conversation, this person did not make eye contact with me. Now, based on that, if I've decided that, oh, this person lacks confidence or this person is not trustworthy, that's my opinion and that's my projection, that I've projected lack of confidence or lack of trust onto that person. The observation is just that in a particular interaction, the person did not make eye contact with me, right? That's the only piece that's an observation there. Right? So, so he says most of the observation here is with people with whom we have history, and yes, and that's the challenge with being compassionate, right? So that it's often easier to be compassionate with strangers with whom we don't have history because there isn't any data that's piled up, right? Whereas with people that are really close to us, with whom we work very closely, there is a high chance that sarcasm slips in or taunts slip in because there is so much history. And the idea of NVC, therefore, is to very consciously plug out, like the giraffe, kind of go way above the ground level and look at, okay, what's really happening in this moment. Right? So yes, it's challenging with people that we have a history of communication with, but that's also the fun of the process. And that's also the gift of the process, that when we shift communication with those people, the relationship completely changes. And that's the beauty of NVC. Stephen says eye contact is dependent on cultural background. Yeah. And that's why, Stephen, the idea that the person did not make eye contact with me is just raw data. We're not drawing any inferences out of it. If I happen to say that the person's not trustworthy or the person's not confident, then therefore that's not an observation, because it could be a cultural perception. Right? So what we're trying to drill down to is raw data around what happened at a particular point in time. So we're not talking of what happens always or what happens never, right? So I'm going to go back to my screen. So we've done this process. And if we look at the difference between the kind of observations we made about the room versus observations we made about the people, we noticed that, of course, there were a lot more loaded adjectives as far as people were concerned. There was also a lot of emotional response around people, whereas it's easier to make observations about things that are inanimate, with whom we don't have that much of a history, so to say, in an emotional sense of the term. So this is the first step, and in a way, the most crucial step when it comes to stepping into nonviolent communication. And if we are able to do this well, which means we are able to jackal out whatever we need to jackal out, which means I'm able to, for example, vent out and say, you know, this is what I think of this person, and colorful adjectives and all of that, and then pause and step into observation and say, okay, yesterday we had this 10-minute interaction in which I said this person said this, right? And those two statements, I said this person said this, is observation, because that's verifiable. That's something that a camera might be able to note, right? Everything else, the story that I've built around it is mine, right? That's not an observation. The observation is just raw data around what actually happened and what is verifiable. From there, we step into feelings and needs. As we said earlier, the first step in the NVC process is observation. Then we go into feelings, and then we go into needs. While these are two separate processes, I'm attempting to do this together because they're also quite interrelated, and it'll help to understand how one impacts the other. So what we're attempting to do is to try and step down from the level of the head, which is all my opinions, blames, judgment, and then finally stepping down at the, if you have to adopt a giraffe point of view, try and convert all of that into an observation, and then step further down into myself, into my heart, and look at what am I feeling around what's happening, and finally look at what does my gut say, what am I really needing around this process. So, okay, before we step into the breakout room, I'm going to share a little bit about feelings and needs. When we talk of feelings, we're talking about emotional experiences, right? So for example, if we take up some of the observations that came in, such as, let's say, the person, let me take up something that's pure observation. The person arrives to work on time, okay? If that's an observation, I have this colleague arrives to work on time. How do I feel about it? I feel maybe I'm fairly neutral around it. There may be no heightened feeling, or I may perhaps feel relieved that, hey, this person's on time, so now we can be on track as far as today's deliverables are concerned. Right? So I might feel relieved. I might feel happy that someone came in on time when they promised that they would come. Uh, if a person arrives on time, I may also sometimes have other feelings associated with it. For example, if it's a day where I'm hoping that a client does not arrive on time so that I have a little more breathing room, there's a possibility that I might feel disappointed that somebody arrived on time, right? So feelings are extremely subjective. Right? And what we are attempting to do is to locate first the observation and then look at what does this observation do to me. And what it does to me could be very different from what it does to another person who might be sitting right next to me and seems to be in the same environment. But both of us might have very different feelings connected to the same observation. Okay? And stepping down from feelings is the idea of needs. Right? And the belief here is that all of us have needs which are universal, needs which are valid, right? And needs that occur because we are human and we are designed the way we are. This is a common uniting factor amongst all human beings, regardless of race or age or other backgrounds that we may come from. So for example, all of us have need for love, all of us have a need for belonging, for respect, for validation, for uh, care, right? So all of these are, for example, some needs that all of us share. And most of our, in fact, all of our emotions, no matter how unpleasant they may seem in a moment, come because there's a need, a very valid need that is not satisfied or not met in a given moment. Right? So, for example, this morning I had to step out for something and get something from a store, and the person took a really long time to respond, you know, and in between they were on a phone and went inside the store and then came back after a few minutes, seemed very distracted. And that entire experience, if I were to jackal out around it, it was about saying, oh God, the storekeeper is so unprofessional, and it's so not fair to keep me waiting out in the heat, and you know, particularly with all the paraphernalia that we wear given COVID, it's just so unfair, and I'm never going to come back here again. And there's all that jackling out happening in my head as I'm there. But now if I step back and convert that experience into an observation, the observation around it would be that I went to this particular store to get something. And when I asked the storekeeper for what I wanted, the person acknowledged, and then the person answered a phone call that they were getting. It took about 7 minutes for them to finish the phone call while I waited, and then the person serviced me, right? So that's the observation around it. How did this make me feel? I felt irritated in that moment, on the edge of anger, not angry enough to shout, but yes, on the edge of anger. I felt physically tired and uncomfortable having to wait out in the heat. And yes, those were a couple of feelings that I was going through: irritation, mild anger. Right? What was my need in the moment? So we've got observations, we've got feeling. What was I needing in the moment? And it's that unmet need which led to that unpleasant feeling, right? The need was perhaps of ease, I wanted it to be an easy transaction, simple, go to the store, get stuff, come back home, right? So I wanted it to be easy. I wanted it to be quick, right? Now the quickness is my strategy, right? I believe that it'll be easy if things are done in a speedy manner, but that's my strategy around the need. The need is really for ease. The need is that a transaction goes smoothly. Now, a lot of times we tend to confuse needs with our strategy around the need. So for example, I may need love. I want you to express your love to me in this particular manner is my strategy around the need, right? I want you to tell me that you love me every day is my strategy around the need. That's not my need. The need is just love. Okay? And that love can, the need for love can be met in many, many ways. And the most empowering part about NVC for me is the staunch belief that's embedded in the philosophy that the need is, all needs can be met by oneself, right? If no one else can meet my needs for me, at least I can be there for myself around it. It may not be the optimal way of satisfying the needs, but there is a possibility around it. So we're going to step into an exercise. Before that, I'm just looking at the questions. Needs can be equal to want. That's a great question, Nimita. So no, we're not talking of wants or expectation, right? So for example, and which is where, for example, let's say if my need is that, if my need could be of order, okay? My need could be that things need to be placed in the right place, right time, right? And let's say if my partner or a flatmate has not stacked the dishes properly, right? I might want to go and fight with the person and say, hey, you've got to stack the dishes in this particular manner so that my need for order is met. But then that's a want, right? The strategy I'm adopting is that for my need for order to be fulfilled, I want my partner to stack dishes in a particular way, but that's just a strategy around the need. If I'm able to drill down to the need and acknowledge that, okay, my need is for order, and for whatever reason, my partner's unable to meet that need, right? Because they do things differently. How else do I meet the need? Right? So if I'm able to stick to the need, I'm able to also re-strategize very quickly instead of having to get into a conversation with someone who may not understand what my strategy is all about, right? And they might even be willing to cooperate with me if I'm able to explain the need instead of having a fight over the strategy, because any fight over the strategy or the want or the expectation is always about jackling, right? It's always a head level communication where there is no connection. What we are attempting to do is drill down, connect at the level of need. So for example, my need is of order and that person's need in stacking dishes in a certain way is something else. Maybe they're looking for ease, maybe they're looking for something else. So if you're able to talk about that then leads to a more fruitful resolution, right? So what we're going to do is step into a breakout exercise here. And each person, we will make it a spacious exercise so that hopefully all of us will have time to share. We will work in groups of 3. I'm hoping our internet holds up for all of us and we're all able to step into the breakout rooms. And each person gets to play each of these 3 roles in a round robin manner. You can decide who goes first. So there's the role of the speaker, the person who speaks and shares about a conversation, challenging conversation that you're working on and on which you're trying to apply the NVC framework. So there's a speaker, there's a listener. The role of the listener is just to listen, right? You might want to give verbal nods, you might want to acknowledge, egg the person on, maybe encourage them to maybe sharpen their observations or be able to label their needs or feelings. But you're not supplying content to them. All you're doing is asking questions as a listener, if at all needed. Otherwise, just let the speaker speak and the listener hold space. And the observer is holding space for both the speaker and the listener, right? And also hopefully monitoring time for the group, right? And so each person can take on each of these three roles in a round robin manner. What we are looking to discuss is think back about the challenging conversation that you thought of at the beginning of the session and convert your description of the challenge into an observation. And we practiced observations a little bit, so hopefully that shouldn't take too long. Step down to the level of feeling. So when I encounter this observation, what is it that I feel? Not sure why needs is not appearing here, but yes, we are also looking to step down to the level of needs. I feel this and I need so and so, or this is a need that is not met, not satisfied in the process. Okay, so that's what we are attempting to do in the breakout session. For us to be able to work with feelings and needs, I'm pasting on the chat box a link to what is an inventory of feelings and needs. You should be able to open that Google Drive link that I've just pasted on the chat box. So what that document contains is a list of words that might help to add to your vocabulary in terms of being able to specify feelings and needs. So if you wish to, you can refer to that document to be able to name feelings and needs better. If you don't want to refer to it, that's okay as well. Yeah. So we are at 3:15. Okay. So we're going to do a 20-minute exercise. So I'm hoping each person gets about 6 minutes or so to be able to complete their process, and maybe some time if needed for wrap up and feedback. So we'll set the breakout for 20 minutes and make sure that you play all the three roles. The attempt is to go through 3 steps and articulate it for yourself. What's the observation around the challenging conversation? What are you feeling? And what do you need in the situation? What is the need that is not met in the given situation? Okay, so we're trying to name and articulate these 3 pieces. So let's step into our breakout groups. I understand that some of us may not want to step into breakout groups. I've got a couple of messages on chat. If you don't want to, that's okay. I'll be here in the main room and happy to have that conversation here as well. But I would strongly encourage that those of us who are able to go into the breakout rooms, please use this time for practice. Those of us who are here, I'm assuming you're here because you don't want to be in the breakout groups. If not, maybe just drop in a message on the chat so that we can send you into a breakout room.
You might have to move your screen if you're on the phone to see the pop-up. There's one person who's alone in the breakout room. Should I bring him back, or does somebody want to go there? Does anyone over here want to go into a breakout room? So then I'll just move this first.
Is there a room with 2 people where they can move?
I moved him to another room. So
Yeah.
do you want to go to any breakout room? You're on mute.
I think I'll stay on here. Don't want to interrupt the process because
Yeah, because I was like just making sure that everyone was fine. But now I feel like if I go in, it'll just disrupt everything.
yeah, suddenly there's silence when you enter, so rather not
And
disrupt.
it's not much time also. So
Yeah.
this is absolutely brilliant, Rukmini. I mean, you explain it so, simply, easily, and hopefully we can practice it as well.
I know NVC is something I'd love to do in a physical format somehow. While it can happen in a virtual form, I love to actually do the dance floors, which can't happen in a virtual form. But yeah, hopefully people take something from it.
Yeah. So the maximum we had at one point was 42 people.
Yeah. ये तुम्हारा है क्या?
क्या?
Rukmini, shall I end it?
Yeah, sure. I think a few more people coming back. Welcome back, everyone. Always nice to see faces pop back in. And I hope all of us had a fruitful conversation in the breakout groups. Any challenges that you'd like to share? Maybe we could open up to 2 or 3 questions before we proceed. You could either put it in the chat box or raise your hand and talk.
We were talking about feelings and inferred or implying things, like saying you feel ignored sort of implies that that person ignored you, whereas you could go deeper into a non-accusatory feeling to describe that better.
Absolutely, and that's a valuable point to bring in, Pia, that sometimes in the process of feeling, I might go back into the judgment space, in the Jackling space. So yeah, when I say something like I feel ignored, that the underlying, that the subtext is that you ignored me, right? Which is an accusation. So it might help in that case to back up, go back to the observation around what happened and talk about what I really feel, that, you know, I felt sad that this was the way we interacted, or I felt whatever else I felt. I felt angry or upset, or any of that. Yes, that's an important point to bring in. Thank you, Peter. Anyone else?
One thing that was quite interesting in our conversation was how the expression, how we felt, maybe we didn't get far enough into the conversation, expressing the conversation, but we felt that it would actually expose ourselves, that there was quite a bit of vulnerability in trying to phrase the conversation in terms of observations, feelings, and needs.
Yes, it is something that we go into in a space of trust, that yes, and yeah, therefore it is very natural to feel vulnerable because we're sharing something that's very real and critical to us. So but that's also for me the power of the conversation, that because we're able to be vulnerable and authentic, therefore it invites the other person to also respond in that manner. Marshall often says it takes only one giraffe in a conversation, in the sense that the other person does not have to know NVC, the other person does not have to believe in it, or even be in a mind frame to be able to enter into this mode of conversation, but it still works, if not immediately, but over a period of time it works, because the one giraffe in the conversation can turn it around. So that's also the power in the conversation. All right, we've got.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, James.
Yeah, you mentioned just now trust. Does NVCC say anything about establishing trust before this process begins? Because somehow I feel that that needs to happen first in order to have an authentic conversation like that. I'm new to NVC, but I'm just getting the feeling that that needs to happen first before we begin this process of describing your observation, and then going to describing how I feel, and then going next to describing my needs. Yeah.
I understand in terms of, yes, so when you say trust, it's probably important for psychological safety for us to be able to have trust. Having said that, sometimes we cannot afford the time to be able to do that, particularly when you're in the heat of a conversation and you want to step into NVC. One steps in with courage, and then the trust happens along the way. So at least in my experience, I don't see that as a prerequisite as much as a result of having practiced NVC. So yeah, maybe sometimes the prerequisite is courage when the trust does not exist.
So you are saying that it's a byproduct more than a prerequisite for this process to begin.
At least that's been my experience, that sometimes the trust builds because you choose to trust in the process. May not trust in the other person, but you trust the process.
Could I add one more point, Rukmini?
Yes,
Reena here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, James, it's also setting the intention, I feel. You know, if I set the intention that I want to be authentic, or I want to show up from a connected space, like which is more like the heart space in the present moment, that helps. As I do understand your question also as what is the pre-preparation? And I think the pre-preparation is setting the intention and courage, as Rukmini said. And then I relate to the trusting the process. Because when we go to the byproduct or the output, then again, we move away from the present moment consciousness. So trusting the process also helps me to stay open to whatever best can happen. Best is also an evaluation. Whatever can happen, you know.
Yeah.
From each one moment to the next. So intention, courage, and intention to connect from an authentic space builds a higher possibility of trust and connection with the other.
Thanks for that, Reena. Reena's been practicing NVC for a really long time, so it's lovely to have you here, Reena. We're part of some community, NVC communities together.
Rukmini, I think Catherine and Saga have their hands up.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Rukmini, I think in my discussions earlier in the breakout group, we talked about apathy as a fuel to violent conversation. Would that be a fair observation, that apathy can fuel or it can trigger forms of violent communication by just the inactivity of a response to something?
I'm not sure if I get the question right, Catherine. So are you saying observation in the context of NVC?
Well, more apathy as a characteristic in I guess in the context of NVC, it is basically it's not communicating, but it's also a lack of response based on what we expect and need from another person. So can that fuel a form of violence in some way?
Well, may or may not. I don't want to risk making a general statement that it does.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so in that sense, I mean, in the NVC context, I would often think of that as lack of connection.
Yes.
That when there isn't enough connection, then yes, there's a possibility that I might use language in a way that's mindless, and that therefore that can be violent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sagar?
Yeah, I mean, Reena has already said what I wanted to say. I just want to add that having connection really helps, because when you're making a request, then it doesn't land as a strategy. If there's that connect between the person and you, then it kind of it lands. And of course, intent, as Rina said, the intention is also very important. Intention is very crucial. So yeah, so just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks for underlining that, because at the end of the day, it's the intention which changes the tone and the energy of the space. So it is really critical. And in that sense, I'm hoping, Surabhi, that it partly answers your question also around how does NVC help if others aren't open to it. It's not so much about the technique as much as it is about the value of NVC, in the sense that we are able to, or we at least hold the intention to connect with our own needs and the needs of the other person that we are in a conversation with. And the moment we enter the conversation with that sense of connection, that I'm looking to talk to your needs and I'm not looking to argue with your strategy, that completely shifts the tone. So it's not so much about whether the other person knows NVC or is open to it or not, as much as what am I connecting with? Am I looking to go argue over strategy, or am I going deeper and looking at saying, hey, this person's responding the way they do because there is an unmet need. Can I find out what that need is? Can I stay curious about it? So that often shifts the tone. Okay, we've got less than 15 minutes, but I do want to share the last piece, which is around requests, and I hope that you will carry the practice of it forward later in your own spaces. Let me go back to my screen. Yeah. So far we were at observation, then feeling, and then needs. So where we started off was around the process of jackling out or jackling in, right? Where we're talking about judgments, opinions, blame, thoughts, and so on. And then from there, stepping into the space of observation, which is neutral, which is raw data, which is about exactly reproducing what happened in an event without attaching adjectives and adverbs to it, if I have to put it in simple grammatical terms. Right? So that's observation. And then from there, we drill down to what am I feeling, therefore, given the observation, and what unmet needs give rise to the feeling. The next step, which closes the loop of the NVC process, is that of requests. And often when we hear the term requests, we think of it as, saying please and being polite in terms of language and asking for permission and so on. And that's not quite the NVC interpretation of request. What we are talking about is a three-step process within the request layer, where having identified our needs and perhaps having also guessed the other person's needs, or maybe even having gotten into a conversation about what the other person's needs are, when we come to resolution, right? The request process has three steps. The first step is always about a request for connection, in terms of asking the person, are you really willing to connect around this at this point in time, right? And it's possible that the person may say, no, I'm just too angry with you right now, I don't want to talk to you about it, right? Or the person may say, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I don't have the energy for this right now. So the whole point of the request for connection is simply to check if both the parties involved are in an energy space where they wish to continue the conversation further. So that's the connection request. And then there's a request for understanding, which is about saying, okay, here's how my experience of this interaction has been, right? Whatever is the conflict or interaction that you're talking about. Right? It's about saying, here is how I experience it, right? So for example, when you throw your towel on the floor, here is what happens to me. And when we say request for understanding, it's about saying, are you willing to listen to what's happening to me? I'm not saying you are making me feel this. I'm saying I feel this when the towel is dropped on the floor, and I feel this because I have a certain need around it. So that's where I'm trying to make the person, help the other person understand what my experience is, and hopefully also extend the practice to say, what's your experience of the same situation? What is it that you go through, or what is it that you went through when we had that interaction? And then finally coming to a request for action, which is about saying, okay, the next time we have to work on this particular issue, or the next time we have to have a conversation around this, or the next time you do the dishes, would you be open to doing it in this particular manner, right? And of course, also being open to an action request from the other in terms of, would you like me to do something differently the next time around? So there is reciprocity in this conversation around requests. So while I'm talking of this as a 3-step process, it's not a 1, 2, 3 thing. It's often a back and forth where you're checking in with your state of connection, their state of connection. You're providing your understanding of the situation. You're asking for their understanding, and you're making your request for action, and maybe also hearing their request for action. A very important piece when you're in the space of requests is to remember that it's a request and not a demand. And therefore, please be prepared to hear a no. It's absolutely okay if the other person says, no, I'm going to continue to throw the towel when I come out of the bathroom, and that's what it's going to be. And then you might want to renegotiate around, okay, how else can your need be met, right? You can get into a conversation around saying, here is why it is, here is why my need is unmet, and you can talk about maybe other strategies to fulfill the same need. But here is where the non-violence comes in the process, right? That you're willing to hear a no, and therefore it's a request and not a demand. And it's possible that in the first few times, particularly in a relationship where there's been a lot of history of conflict or a lot of emotional pile-up already, there is a possibility that the first few requests will not go well. Right? You might be shot down, the person might say no, the person might not respond to a request for connection, and that's okay. It's important to sustain with the process, and in sustaining with the process, you also start building trust, because you're constantly going back to the person with the same conversation, with the trust that at some point the person is willing to respond, right? And that also creates a space of trust, because you're willing to put in that effort into that conversation. So yeah, that's the crucial next step around requests. And so yeah, the practice that I will invite you to do, maybe in your own spaces, given that we don't have too much time left, is to think about a few conversations, critical conversations that you need to have in the coming days, and attempt to go through the 4-step process. And maybe before you step into a conversation with the other person, practice the conversation in your head. So maybe write out these statements if it helps you, right? Well, when I see this happens, or when I hear this particular statement, or whatever the observation is, I feel so and so because my need for so and so is not met. And remember here, the language is that my need is not met. I'm owning up my feeling and my need. It's not about saying you're not meeting my need. It's about saying I have a need and it happens to be unmet. And therefore, would you be willing to? And then go to connection and understanding and action requests. So that's a practice you might want to do before you step into crucial conversations in the coming days, and play with it. As a practitioner, I can say it's NVC has very remarkably changed relationships for me. It's also changed the trust levels in relationships, and the more you practice, the easier it becomes to establish connection, even with absolute strangers at times, because you start carrying the energy of it in you. So it's been a very valuable practice, and I would strongly encourage that you give it a go. So to sum up, the layer at which we are attempting to communicate is not the top layer, which is thoughts, opinions, judgment, blame, argument, your point of view, my point of view. All of that is really cerebral conversation. It can sound intellectual, it can be quite seductive to get into that sort of an argument, but it might be completely devoid of connection. So what we are therefore trying to do is to step out of the Jackling space and step into observation, feeling, needs, and then speak through a language of requests. And request, as we said, is very importantly a 3-step process. First, look to connect, and then look to share your understanding, understand the other person as well, and come to a mutually acceptable course of action. So that's the summation of the NVC process. And I want to end with one of Marshall's quotes, where in the book Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, he speaks about how all violence is a result of people tricking themselves into believing that their pain derives from other people, and that consequently those people deserve to be punished, which is the underlying violence in sarcasm or in taunts or in sometimes convoluted way of saying things. So that's what we're attempting to get over and get into a space of connection when we use the NVC philosophy, not so much a technique, but a philosophy. So that's that in terms of content. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm happy to take questions or comments if there are any. And of course, also want to thank Elaine and Elsa for supporting me through this process. Elaine, do you have anything to say about the association?
No, I think really that was such good practice at our observations. I've learned this structure for years ago, and still I need to practice on observations and delivering proper requests rather than demanding my kids and not giving them an out. So I think this is hopefully my husband and my kids will benefit from this session soon rather than later. So thank you. I really appreciate you taking this time to share with us. So everyone, if you could please fill out a form that we've just put in the chat box to help us ensure that we're delivering topics that are useful to you. The link is different, but I think they're the same because I obtained different links just now. But it's a short form. We just want to know what topics you're interested in, how you found this session, so that we can work on things, whether it's the technology or the way that we've unintentionally created challenges for you to participate or discomforts. Please let us know there's nothing that's not going to be helpful for us in improving this. We do have a session on the 22nd of this month on drama and peace building. It will be 2 hours earlier than today's session. Please include your email in the survey if you wish to hear about future sessions. We also have one on the 26th, which will be very late for those of us in New Zealand and Australia or in the Pacific, because it's being led by the Trauma Institute in the US. It's on the community resilience model. So do join us for that if that's of interest to you. So other than that, please follow our Facebook page. There are videos of our recent conference with many talks, future webinars, and all the other things that we'll be doing. We'll be posting on that. So if you are interested in peace or conflict resolution or any of the topics that I've mentioned, please join that Facebook page, Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association. Our webpage is rpfaa.org, but the Facebook page is probably the best way to keep track of things. Other than that, thank you for joining us. And thank you, Rukmini.
Thank you. And I've put in my email ID on the chat box in case any of you wish to connect or understand NVC deeper. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rukmini.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great session.
Thanks, Bian.
Thank you, Rukmini, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rukmini, and to all the organizers. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Rukmini. Thank you.
Bye, Prakash.
Prakash, good to see you here.
Thank you, everybody.
Great,
And greetings from
great.
Nairobi.
Thank you, Rukmini.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Rukmini. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.
Elaine, can I ask a question?
Yes, James.
Hi, there are two links that were posted. Are they the same?
Yeah, I think they're the same. It's just that I uploaded, I just got it the second time and it just gives you a second link, but it's the same.
So there are two parts to the form, right? One is the feedback about today's session, and the other one is what events or training you want to see in future.
No, just click on one of them. They're both they lead to the same document. Just click on any of them.
Sure. But you also mentioned in your comment just now that you're also looking at feedback on what kind of future events we would like to see. Is that right?
It's in the survey as well.
I see. Thank you. Can I ask a very quick question, Rukmini? Is that okay?
Sure.
Very quick question. I'm just wondering, this request, is it recommended in the NVC method that it works even for relationships where there's a power difference, like, for example, parent and child or supervisor and subordinate? Is this last part, which is the request bit, is it also recommended for relationships where there's a power difference?
Yes, the process, in fact, is meant to bring in parity. So you can practice it in exactly the same way, even if there's a dynamic in the relationship.
Oh, so it is also recommended as well that you request, no matter you have a high status or lower status or high power, low power, you should still make the request, right?
Yes, you do, because the intention is to connect with the needs. The intention is to connect with what is the core human connecting factor between the two of you. So the power dynamic doesn't really matter.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the session. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rukmini. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Roshan, you had your hand up. Did you want to speak? Oh, Roshan's gone. Okay.
Bye, James.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Saloni, are you
Saloni. It was great.
Hi, this
Should we
was so
start
good.
recording?
I was busy completing the form, so sorry I forgot to leave the meeting, but thank you so much. This was a very wonderful session and so nice to see all these known faces again. Really